Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Legal Cheat podcast. This week's episode is a follow-on from last week's, where I was joined by our site's editor, Tom Connolly, to discuss how to secure a training contract at a top firm. However, we're now back to our usual programming, and I'm delighted to be joined once again by my colleague and fellow writer, Julia Szaniszlo. Today, we'll be discussing how to succeed in the later stages of the application process. So, Julia, you've just been away for the past couple of weeks. First of all, how are you? And secondly, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing?
Hi, it's lovely to be back. Thank you, Ryan. I'm doing good. Yeah, so for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of emailing me whilst I've been on leave and receiving a lovely holding email in response, I've been away for a few weeks on a vac scheme at a law firm, and so I've had a lovely first-hand experience of the entire process quite recently. So we thought it'd be nice to run you guys through not just the written part of the application process, but what comes afterwards. Um, it's been a great couple of weeks. It's been quite tiring, but really, really great as a learning opportunity. I've very much enjoyed it. We'll wait and see what comes of it because I'm still in the waiting process beforehand. So no spoilers for anyone because I have no clue. But yeah, so it's a really stressful period for lots of people when you're applying for training contracts. And as Ryan and Tom would have told you last week, even the written process can be excruciating. But then it's not over yet. Once you've submitted the application, there comes a slew of other tasks that you will have to face in order to get through to the VAC scheme or the training contract itself. So I'll just run through them briefly, and then I guess Ryan and I will be discussing how to deal with each of these individual stages and how to, get past them in a way which is effective, and gives you the best outcome. So obviously this can vary. Every law firm has their different way of doing things, but most firms will start with the written application or at least some kinds of grades. Some firms are doing away with written applications entirely because AI is being used to churn out a number of them, so they're having according to them, a hard time discerning between what's AI and what's student written. Then there's usually some form of a test, whether that be a SJT, so a situational judgment test in combination with a Watson Glaser. Some firms will also make you do a maths test, not all, but I have seen that happen. I have done one myself, and I know some people are quite blindsided by those. Ryan will take us through those in a moment. Well, not the maths test, but just generally. Then you can have a combination of the following. Some firms will ask you to do a written task, which you complete online in a set period, and then you submit to them. Or they may ask you to do one of those lovely pre-recorded video interviews. So that's when you have a minute to prepare for a question, and then you record yourself speaking for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, however long it may be for a few questions. It can depend. I've seen three, I've seen two. It depends. Some firms will also do a telephone interview. I haven't had that experience myself, but I know that exists. And then once you've got through all of these preliminary stages, usually the next thing will be an assessment center or a combination of an assessment center and an in-person sort of interview. These will, as you all know, take course over a day. They may take a few hours in the morning, in the afternoon, or you may be there the whole day. And you can do a number of things. You can get involved in case study exercises. You can have a partner interview. You can have any number of other exercises. And then, of course, if you actually get onto a vacation scheme, as I have experienced over the last couple of weeks, you may also do assessments during that period. So it sort of functions as everyone will hear us saying, the cliche, a 2 week long interview or a 3 week long interview, depending on what you're doing. But that's just a brief overview. The first hurdle that people tend to fall out past the actual application form is, of course, the test. So, Ryan, do you want to talk us through what kinds of online tests people can expect and how to best them?
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts. There's the critical thinking or the Watson Glaser test is the obvious one. And that's probably the most difficult for a lot of people. I mean, most people I speak to say they always fail at that step and they never know how to beat it. The situational judgment test, so it puts you in a position of like a trainee lawyer and asks what you do in that situation, and you're supposed to like rank responses from what's the most appropriate response to what's the least appropriate. Then there's sometimes personality and behavioral type tests, which assess kind of like what your personality and your skill sets like against the requirements they're looking for from a trainee. Um, Some firms do gamified assessments, so there's like fun little clicky elements and other bits you can do in it. As Julia says, there's like maths tests too, spag tests I've seen occasionally. I had a bit of a spag test with the Freshfields application process once, and a bit of a grammar geek, so I quite enjoyed that actually. Mini review exercises like that as well, so just checking your attention to detail. A mini case study. I believe Wilkie did that as part of the online application. There was somewhat of like a small case study you had to fill in within a certain time frame, and then also blended assessments. So that kind of combines multiple of these elements. When I applied to Live in 2024, they had kind of elements that they had a one video interview question, some personality type questions, I believe, a few critical thinking questions. It just blended everything together into one seamless test. You didn't know what was coming next. So yeah, as Julia says as well, firms can use any sort of combination of these different tests. You never really know what's coming until you apply. And it's difficult to advise on how to be a pro or how to best these tests when they're all so very different. And because every firm will use different questions as well. But what I did to kind of prepare myself as best as possible for whatever was coming, I practiced as many as possible as I could get my hands on. So like practice ones. There's a website called SHL that I used, and I think it's quite a website that quite a lot of graduate recruiters rely on. And they have a lot of practice tests on there from across the whole like gamut of different online tests. Situational judgment versions on there. There's critical thinking questions on there. There's gamified assessments you can do too. There's so many examples you can rely on. I kind of went through and did as many as I could. And unfortunately, I think there's a few examples of each on there as well. And I think it's hard to find any actual reliable examples otherwise online that are free. There's quite a lot of websites online as well that promise to give you like how to beat the online assessments, and it's paid tests on there. And I don't necessarily find them reliable. I wouldn't really pay my money for it. I don't think it should be a pay to win scenario to get a training contract. But yeah, SHL I found fantastic. I use that quite a lot to be as prepared as possible. And then I also submitted some practice or dummy applications early on. So I had like a short list of firms I wanted to apply to. Some were at the top of my short list that I really wanted a training contract at. Some were close toward the bottom. Like if I got a training contract there, I would happily take it, but it wasn't my number one firm. So I kind of got some of those out of the way first, knowing that it was kind of practice for me. And the more of those kind of practice applications I sent out, the more familiar I became with the whole application process of, first of all, doing an application form and having some answers for that, but then also just doing the online assessments. And because obviously, as I say, every firm uses different assessments, it just got me familiarized with few of the different formats that were there. And I think the last piece of advice as well, and it's just, I mean, these are all simple ones. As I say, it's really hard to prepare for the online test, is to not leave them to the last minute. I've worked full time when I was applying for training contracts, not just one. Um, and there was times when I left them until like the Sunday evening because they give you a week to do it, and left it right before the deadline. And then I'd be rushing it and I'd be stressed out, and it wouldn't get the best kind of answer out of me as possible. Whereas when I gave myself time to do it and actually thought it through, sometimes they weren't even timed. The tests, you had a lot of untimed ones, so you could just spend as much time as you wanted on it as possible. And it's not detrimentally assessed against you if you take a while. So just having that time in place and just being able to relax and go through it slowly really helped. Another thing as well, actually, that I'd say is maybe you kind of got to learn how to beat the test, and sometimes maybe work into your natural intuition. I know I had to in the critical thinking test. Sometimes I thought an answer was right in a Watson Glaser. That you've got to say whether an assumption's true or an assumption's false, and make inferences and things like that. And sometimes I just find out that my natural answer was always wrong. So after doing a lot of practicing of Watson Glaser, I found out that there is a very specific way to think that there is a right answer that they're trying to assess here. So I had to get into their mind of being in a Watson Glaser rather than seeing what I thought was right. And I managed to score quite highly on the firm I actually got the training contract from, because I asked for my results afterwards. And I kept asking for my results to see if there's any improvement from time to time, see what I was doing right or wrong. And I also did a lot of practice tests. Same with situational judgment and personality tests. With the personality test, if you look online at their graduate recruitment page, they'll say what they're looking for from a trainee. Usually it's all the same, like adaptability, leadership, teamwork, but they'll stress which skills are kind of most important from their trainees. And the personality type test and the situational judgment type test will kind of be reflective of that. So if there's like one of the typical examples you always see on an SJT is a senior associate is giving you some work to do by this deadline, but then a partner comes to you and completely careballs you and says, I want this done today. Another piece of work, what do you do? And then there'll be five answers. One of them will be like, oh, abandoned birth piece of work. That's completely rational. Let's do none of it. And then the second one will be like, do the senior associate's work first, tell the partner to go away. And the third one will be like, make sure to stay late and do both of them. Obviously, the third one's probably the best answer there, but sometimes they're a lot trickier than that. And if you just try and get into the mindset of what the graduate recruiters are looking for from you there, I think it becomes much easier to approach the online test. It's kind of methodical in a way. But yeah, that's all the advice I have for the online test. It's a very difficult one. As I said, firms use different kind of assessments each time, so you never know what to expect. But the next stage is the dreaded video interview, as Julia says. We're going to park that for now and revisit it later because the final stage of the assessment process is usually an in-person interview. So the prep for an online and an in-person interview are pretty similar. So we'll come to that at the end. But yeah, before we move on to the interview bit, Julia, let's move on to the assessment center. So, I mean, do you have any experiences with assessment centers? What type of tasks did you get up to during yours?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think I have quite as much experience as you, but I remember the one I did for this fact scheme. It was a typical case study exercise, and I think that's worth bearing in mind that even if the exercises that you have to do during your assessment center take lots of different forms, they'll usually be based around some sort of case study, and it just depends what you have to then do with it. So the typical ones I've seen or done myself are you have to present something, whether that's 5 minutes, 20 minutes. I've seen more, I've seen less. So you get some sort of pack of information, a case study, maybe a company's trying to acquire another company and you have to do some diligence. So what you're going to have to do during that is during that preparation period that you might be given, and it might be 20 minutes, it might be 45 minutes, is really pick out the key issues. They're not going to give you enough time to cover everything. And I think that counts for absolutely all kinds of tasks that law firms give you during these assessed tasks. They're not going to really give you the opportunity to absolutely cover everything in detail because they want to see your ability to prioritize. So you might be asked to present on a case study, for instance, in a team. So in that case, you might need to demonstrate some level of teamwork. Or you could be given your case study and then have to take it into a partner interview afterwards. So that we'll talk about that later as well. But in that case, you're on your own, so you need to be prepared to be grilled on your responses or on your thoughts. So if you have identified, let's say there's a supply chain issue in this for this company, that for the target that you're trying to acquire, for your client. Well, you're going to need to talk about why it's an issue, how you could potentially solve it, and be prepared to be asked, why do you think that's a good idea? And they're okay with you not having the answers, either within the partner interview or within the sort of pitch or presentation format. But you need to be able to justify yourself and then also be able to say, I'm not sure. I'd get back to you on that. I think that's something that people really forget. You're not going to know about like French or Spanish law if they suddenly ask you about it, and you wouldn't be expected to know anything about it as an English lawyer. So don't suddenly start saying, oh, I think it's this. Be sort of pragmatic with your responses. Um, Another thing that I've seen people do, and I did myself recently, but as part of the VAC scheme, was a negotiation assessment. And this, I think, is quite daunting for a lot of people because it's not really something you can prepare for. You don't tend to get any information on it until you're going into the room and you have maybe 20 to 45 minutes to read through some information, and then you just go and you have to negotiate potentially on a number of points, and you have to come to an agreement with the other VAC schemers, the other parties in your negotiation. I think the key thing here is that they're assessing your ability to communicate and work as part of a team. I think within all of these tasks, you just need to be polite, and clearly structured, but kind in a way. You don't want to be rude and unwielding when it comes to like certain points that you're negotiating on. I've heard many horror stories from our assessors about VAC schemers or candidates getting really worked up about certain points on a negotiation and getting into either physical or verbal altercations with other candidates. Don't do that. It's not worth it. Be willing to concede. But I think the most important thing for both negotiations and presentations is that you know the facts that you're given. You can't be expected to know absolutely everything, but you are expected to know what's given to you in a piece, in that pack that you get either for the presentation or for the negotiation. Know exactly what you want, as for your party, know what the other people might want, sort of what are your limitations, where's your limit on what you can what you can get and what you would settle for maybe a little bit. Um, and ask intelligent follow-up questions, be communicative. Also, I think during the negotiation exercise, it's very valid to maybe turn to your partner if you have one, and just ask everyone else, could we take a moment to just talk about this if someone brings up a point? Say, just give us a minute, and then you can talk to each other, communicate in that way. So, yeah, I think they're just assessing your ability to take in lots of information and be able to express it coherently. Some of the other things that I've seen is having a written exercise in person. So this is quite different to the ones that are, as Ryan's mentioned, incorporated into the online test because you might be sitting in a room with a pen and a piece of paper. So make sure you're actually familiar with writing by hand. I know lots of people at university don't really do that anymore. I did in my final exam, which was quite like a throwback to my A levels. Um, and I think in this case, it's also you might be being asked to write some sort of a memo to a client. You might be asked to write a letter about a case study. You're also going to be absorbing a lot of information and spitting out the key issues. I think for everything that you get in an AC, it's all about prioritizing key issues. It's all about being able to work and communicate in a team if it's applicable. And it's about being able to communicate your ideas in a clear, structured way even if it feels really basic for the written exercise, go back to your peel structure, your point, your evidence, and your explain. It sounds, a bit like, we're not in GCSEs, we're not in our A levels, but people lose structure when they're stressed. So if a diligence issue is, let's say, the supply chain, you've got an exclusive contract with a key supplier for your business. Well, we're going to need to, this is a key diligence issue for this reason, because, we use this product in absolutely, we use a sort of thing that's being supplied to us in absolutely everything in all of our products. Therefore, it is of high importance that we check that there's no change of control clause or that there aren't risks to that supply chain because of, let's say, the war in the Middle East at the moment, or multiple wars in the Middle East, that could affect it. It's just about being as structured as you possibly can and being organized with your thoughts and your time and being able to work well as part of a team if you're in a presentation or in a negotiation. And just finally, I know I've rambled slightly, but if you have tasks during your vacation scheme that you need to prepare for, so this is beyond the assessment center, if most of your assessments take place during the VAC scheme itself, make sure you give yourself enough time to prepare for them. Do not leave them to the last minute. The one that we had recently was on a Monday. Well, one of them, the one that we could prepare for, it was a pitch to a client. And we essentially worked on it all the way from the Monday before until the Monday that we did it. So for a full week. And, during that time, we had networking or presentations or, work to do for our actual seats. So what they're doing is they're overloading you with so much work because they want to see how you react to that. They know that you can't do everything, but they want to know that you can work together, prioritize and be structured, be communicative, and do your best. And they grilled us afterwards during the actual pitch, and it was terrifying. But because we had prepared, we were able to answer in a good enough way. We'll see. We got it was quite funny. They gave feedback immediately afterwards, which was humbling to say the least, but it was quite helpful. Ryan, anything to add to that?
I just say with a case study, I always thought that what I'd get was an M&A case study. So you'll see a merger and acquisition,
Yeah.
you'll see a company want to take over another one. And I went to several open days, and sometimes I give those case studies there to practice, like they go through it with us. And it was always an M&A case study.
Yeah.
However, every single place I went to, like a final interview, final assessment center out, I never got an M&A case study once. It was always
Joking.
something, yeah, it was always something different. So
Yeah.
in my mind, I kind of thought, okay, first one's a fluke. Second one, oh, this is a bit weird. Third one, oh, well, maybe they're not that common. I still do think they are common. I just think be prepared for other scenarios to come up. So to explain it a bit further, one of them was a litigation case study. So instead of you're looking at a company wanting to take over some, I don't know, other company, and you got to advise the bidder. Um, in my one of my assessment centers, it was to do with you got a bundle of documents. Your client was wanting to sue someone else, and you kind of just had to go through this bundle of documents, which consisted of like newspapers and emails, etc., just all sorts of stuff, and identify kind of any litigation risk, why they should or shouldn't litigate, any other problems, commercial awareness issues too. So it wasn't just legal stuff, like just identifying any other problems that might be going on in the world at the moment that was pertinent to what was happening here. And I just completely didn't know that was a thing, like a litigation case study. Never heard of it before. No one had ever discussed it. And then another one of my assessment centers, it wasn't even like litigation or M&A. It was kind of just contract review of sorts.
Mm.
But it was really difficult. To be honest, I've kind of blacked out the memory of it because it was really, really hard. But just be prepared to be unprepared. Be
Yeah.
prepared for the unexpected. Like you need to just be comfortable with having a bundle of documents just dumped on you and having to make the most of that in 45 minutes, read through it, kind of absorb as much information as possible. You are never going to be able to come up with a perfect answer in 45 minutes and prepare it. And then, depending on what assessment center you're at, you might be asked to bring it into the interview with the partner with you and discuss it there, or you might just like submit it there and then it's over and done with. You never see it again. But I mean, the time constraints are there to put you on your feet, as Julia says. Like, you are going to be working under a lot of pressure when you're a lawyer anyway. So I think the kind of the purpose of a lot of the things in the assessment center, and it's the same with like curveballs that interview. I think it's to test how quickly you can think on your feet and come up with a decent and decent enough answer. But you're never going to be perfect. And also, there's some humility in admitting that, oh, I don't know the answer. So maybe asking some more questions or asking for time to think. Obviously, you can't do that in a case study, but at the interview at the end, you can be like, okay, I just have a second to think before I answer. I think that's important. But yeah, coming to the end of the assessment center, you have got the interview. So I applied for direct training contracts only because I was a paralegal beforehand. I didn't really want to take any time off to do a back scheme. So at the end of my assessment center, it was just the final interview. But if you're on a vac scheme, your final interview will probably be at the end of the 2 or 3 week vac scheme. Um, so just come into some tips on how to prepare for that video interview, which is much earlier on in the process, which is usually the second or third stage, and also preparing for the final interview. So a couple of things that I did was build a question bank. So as I said before, I kind of submitted some, I won't say dummy applications because I did try really hard in them, but it wasn't my dream firm that I was applying to. So I put them in first for a bit of practice. I was fortunate enough to get quite far in the application processes for some of those and go to assessment centers. And every time I came out of an assessment center, I immediately went on Apple Notes on my phone and typed in any question I was asked, whether it be like kind of the content of a case study, just so I can think about how I'd answer that in hindsight in case something similar comes up in future, or it was in the actual interview of a partner. I noted down the questions they asked me because there was lots of them which I just thought I'd never be asked that or just didn't know what to expect. And just having that bank of questions to revisit and look through, built up over time, really helped in anticipate anything for the future. And also in the future, undoubtedly, they're going to ask me more curveballs that I don't know how to answer. But just having like seen some of the really, really difficult ones already, I think it improves your mind to think, how am I going to answer this on the spot somewhat? But yeah, I mean, obviously, you're not going to go to that many assessment centers and build up a massive bank of questions. So just have a think about what they're going to ask you in advance and kind of jot down some answers or have some key talking points for different types of questions. And another point in that regard is about competency questions. So you'll almost always be asked a competency question. So tell me about a time you've demonstrated teamwork skills. I always had a very specific way of approaching these types of questions. I noted every competency that I thought I might be asked about. So anything a trainee solicitor needs: teamwork, adaptability, maybe leadership, initiative, resilience, writing skills, attention to detail, anything like that. And then I thought back through my life and thought, when have I done an extracurricular activity or worked or in my studies, have I demonstrated that skill before? And instead of kind of rehearsing an answer for each question, so instead of rehearsing an answer for the question, tell me about a time when you demonstrate effective teamwork skills, I'd kind of just have an idea of an experience in my mind. So for teamwork, I'd say maybe, oh, was a treasurer on a university society. And as part of that, I set up committee meetings and we discussed the budget and I made sure that the budget was allocated throughout the entire year by speaking to other committee members and that there's enough a portion for each event, blah, 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 blah. Because it's a very real experience I had, and I had kind of some key talking points related to that experience. If I was asked any question to do with teamwork in an interview, I know I could just kind of rely on that and spiel like extemporaneously and quite naturally without having to spew up a very rehearsed answer. And that's good. I found it helped me a lot because sometimes the question won't be as neatly phrased as you've anticipated it in your mind. So like you might, as I say, I'll try a different example this time. Tell me about a time when you've been resilient. The question might instead be, uh, discuss a situation in which you've had to overcome a really difficult obstacle and how you've learned from that situation and learned from your mistakes. Something really long like that. And you're like, okay, well, what is the kind of core of that question? Resilience and how you've overcame an obstacle. Okay, as long as you have a kind of you have an example of when you've been resilient in your life, like you have an idea of when you demonstrated that competence, then you can speak a bit more extemporaneously about it rather than trying to prepare that exact question and being thrown off. That's how I approach it, and I found it really helped. Um, and then for the final interview as well, do your firm research really thoroughly. It's going to be much more difficult than the online interview. The online interview is usually 3 or 4 questions. As Julia says, you've got like a minute or two to prepare before you have to record yourself, and then you only have to speak for a minute or two in response. Um, so the fact that you have preparation time in these online interviews is kind of like a benefit in and of itself. In a partner interview, you might be able to take some time by taking a sip of water and saying, "Can I just have a second to think?" But they're not going to give you a minute to sit there in silence and think over your answer and jot something down. You kind of got that answer on the spot. Um, quite a lot of the questions will be competency based questions or about your experience, etc., etc. So you can prepare for them as you wish. But I think some of the more difficult ones to prepare for, and you should come to the interview knowing this already, is having your research done. So be ready to explain why you're interested in the firm. Go beyond the surface. Your motivations need to be really specific and generic for this firm. If you just say like, "Oh, it's an international firm with a presence all across the world, and you do top quality work and it's prestigious," that's just a bit boring. I think in mine, I talked about something a little bit generic. They were full service and have band one rankings all across the board. That was kind of common with all the places I applied for. And for me, that meant basically no matter what seat I did, because I wasn't fully sure on where I wanted it to be yet, I'd get top quality training, et cetera, et cetera. But also there was very good in a specific practice area I enjoyed, and that was a kind of renewable energy and project finance. And fortunately, one of the partners that interviewed me was actually a partner in project finance. So I discussed that for a little while. I knew that the firm was very good at it, so I was able to discuss kind of some of the cases and maybe ask them about that. So just come to that interview basically with having done some really good research on the firm, be kind of like solid in your knowledge about it. And if you're going to mention a case or a partner or a ranking, make sure you know enough to like if you're going to be grilled on it because you don't really want to show your how can you not swear on the legal sheet podcast? You don't want to show you behind when they grill you on it and like you've embarrassed yourself a little bit. You clearly don't know that much about it. And yeah, one thing you should also be expected not expecting you should anticipate maybe is being able to pitch the firm's expertise. That was definitely a shocker to me when I got that in my interview. I was like, okay, oh, well, you said this firm is our firm's really good at this practice. Now pitch that as if you were speaking to a client. I was like, oh, that's something I was not expecting at all. Huh?
To do that as well is a terrible question. But I was,
It
yeah, it is
is
valid.
a
I
different
understand
one.
why they ask it.
Yeah. I mean, it is a toughie. If you know, if this is the thing, if you're able to anticipate these curveball questions, or at least some of them, that's the point of being a curveball. You can't anticipate them. But if you just listen to look online for like curveballs, or think yourself, what might they ask me that I need to prepare before I go into the interview for? Thinking of like every eventuality, then you should be a bit more covered than you otherwise would be. Julia, do you have any advice for tackling those kind of really difficult final and also online interviews?
I've got a few. I think it really depends on the person. I think rehearsing your responses, especially for the video interview, if you do it like if you memorize certain things, that can be really rigid and that can
Mm.
completely throw you off. But what I did to prepare for my video ones, I basically spent a day lying in bed and I fed ChatGPT a bank of questions that I had either collated myself or found online, like I'd made a combination. And I made it talk to me. I can't remember if it was you who gave me
Oh
this
wow.
advice. Was it you who gave me that advice?
I don't think it was. I've never heard that before, but it sounds good.
Yeah, and I essentially it would throw out random questions at me and then give me a period of time to respond and then give
Mm.
me pretty naff feedback, I would say. I would ignore the feedback because it's just going to be a yes man and tell you you've done everything perfectly. But what it did was just force me to not like look at a card which had like all of my responses on it, but just pluck from my mind these
Yeah.
experiences as Ryan has talked about and get quite used to comfortably speaking about them in a structured way. And I must say, when it came to competency questions for my vac scheme interview, I got asked absolutely nothing with regards to that. And then when I came to the final exit interview, I got asked few. And I was quite thrown off by this because I had got it in my head that the interview would be quite technical because you have this expectation that you've done the vac scheme, so they're going to expect you to, talk about a certain practice area with some level of
Mm.
depth. My advice would be to not forget your competency-based questions, otherwise you'll be like me, thrown off for 10 seconds as they ask me to talk about a time I've really failed. That's what they asked me. A time I've really truly failed. Everything fell apart because they'd asked a question about resilience beforehand. I'd given a response and they said, right now, but like, turn it up a notch, a time you've really messed up. And I was like,
Or if you just started crying in the interview.
no, I did not have the best like initial response. My initial response was, I must be quite honest with you. I tend to black those moments out. Can I please have a moment to think about that? And the interviewer said, yeah, me too. Don't worry. I was like, all right. It remains to be seen as to whether or not that's an appropriate response. However, what I guess I'm trying to demonstrate with this is that even those very typical questions can sometimes throw you off if you get in your head too much. So go into them with an open mind. Don't overdo it on certain things. Um, Obviously know the firm, that goes without saying. And specifically for people doing an end of vac scheme interview, I'd make sure you've reflected in some way, shape, or form on what you've done because the likely thing they'll ask you as soon as you walk through that door is, how have you found the vacation scheme? And an appropriate response is not to just go, it's been really fun. You need to talk about what you've done, whether that be the work that you've done as part of your seat, or as part of your team, sorry, or whether that be some of the exercises or assessments that you've done. So I went in and I spoke about some work that I had done for the disputes team, and I spoke about it. I said what I'd learnt, and make sure you know the sort of wider context of the work that you've done. For instance, if you're sitting in the M&A team and you've been given an SPA to like read through or populate or something, it's a nice idea to ask the partner or the associate or whoever you're doing the work for what's if they're not too busy, like what the background to this is, like why am I doing this? Because it's good to know why you're getting involved in certain pieces of work, and it shows that you're engaging beyond just dropping in, editing something, reading through something, submitting it, and then leaving. They want to see engagement and they want to see critical thinking, and you will likely be grilled on that in the interview. But sort of as a general rule, I think becoming comfortable talking, talk out loud to yourself. Don't rehearse, but talk out loud. Let your sort of stream of consciousness go. Get rid of some of those jitters. I had a stack of flashcards for my interview with all of these typical questions. I had a few deals that I was comfortable talking about, a few practice areas I was comfortable talking about more technically. And also, another classic example, which I didn't think I'd get asked at this interview, but I did, is a piece of news that you've read recently.
Mm.
I did get asked that to name one specifically, and I've heard there was someone who said this, and I can't remember who it was, that they had heard of a vac schemer or a candidate for some firm interviewing and being asked this question, and they couldn't give a proper response, and the partner who was interviewing them kept pushing them, was like, no, just give me a piece of news, and they kept coming up with some sort of fluffy response until they essentially gave in and said, I'm sorry, I've been so busy on the vac scheme, I haven't had time to read the news. Instant, that's gone. I don't know if they made it. I don't know who they are, but make sure you've read like the morning FT something. Make sure you've just got something in your back pocket that you can talk about
Yeah,
in an interested way. And really, anyone who's becoming a lawyer should be interested in the way that the world works because you're going to be working in it. And it's going to be affecting the work that you do. So if you've got absolutely zero interest in the news, I recommend rethinking maybe how you think about this profession because it's very important. But that threw me off. What did I talk about? Oh, I talked about Hermes and the war in
what
Iran.
about them?
Their share prices have plummeted recently because not enough people
Oh.
are buying their stuff, and it's apparently
Mm,
to do with the fact that well, they rely a lot on tourists from the Middle East, from like
mm,
Dubai, coming to France, like on holiday and buying stuff,
yeah,
and they just haven't been able to. So obviously, it feels a bit like out of touch to talk about like a luxury brand like this during what is ostensibly an extremely stressful and dangerous period for many people. But I
mm,
think why it was of commercial interest and why I could talk about it was because that doesn't tend to happen to this specific brand. They've always been quite
yeah.
resilient. Um, yeah, so I spoke about that. That was fun. And then
That's
they asked me,
that's
why
quite
do people
interesting.
buy them? Like, why do people bother buying MS bags? I was like, oh God. I had a response to that, I think. It was fun, actually. It was fun. It was a fun discussion. But yeah, don't think that every single interview is going to be incredibly structured. Some of them will be more conversational. And be
Yeah.
prepared for that. Show some personality. You're allowed to, within reason. It is still a professional environment. But yeah, as Ryan said, don't over rehearse. Don't think that you have to speak like a robot. That some interviews may have more structure and they may sort of cut you off after a period, but some may treat it more like a conversation, and you need to be ready for that because ultimately they're looking for people that they can work with, that they can put in front of a client or, sit next to a client at a client dinner, and be able to wine and dine them, for lack of a better word. And yeah, so you need to show that you can do that sort of thing as well.
You speaking then had triggered some curveball questions I had got asked through the assessment process, like some ones I blacked out. One of them was, I won't name the firms actually, but one of them was, tell me about a time your integrity is being challenged. And it was such an odd question, I could never have anticipated it. And I was like, how do I answer this in a fashion that doesn't look bad on me? And
Yeah.
also, like, I'd like to think I'm quite a, what's the adjective for integrity? Integral. I'm an integral person. I'd like to think I'm quite
You've
I
got a
have
lot of
good
integrity.
integrity.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So I was really struggling to think of one on the spot, and then I thought, well, no matter what I say, surely this is going to be damning on me. How do I turn it around? So that was a difficult one that I never anticipated I'd get.
Mm.
Um, Another one was, it was like a scenario question, really. It was, a client has asked you to do something. It was some specific dodgy acts, and you're not allowed to do it. But clients always comes first in this firm. We always put the clients first before everything. What do you do in this situation? And it was kind of just like, I'll take a second to think. And I answered something to do with like speaking to the is it the comp the money laundering person at the firm. I let my supervisor get advice from that, but it took me like a little while to just kind of get there because I wasn't expecting it. And another one was, which you should actually, I think you should, isn't that quite a common one nowadays, but it's just, I think you rarely ever know how to answer it properly, is what other firms have you applied for?
Oh yeah.
um I think with that, the thing they're looking for is just to see that there's not like a random slew or scattergun approach to where you're applying. It is kind of like a strategy there, rather than just like hopefully applying to everywhere. I don't
Yeah.
think there's a wrong or right way to answer that. I just basically explained where else I'd applied and kind of how they were similar to this firm and why I applied, and why I didn't apply to other places. And also have a good night's sleep before the interview. I remember my final interview for the training contracts I got, and this is not obviously advice, it's the opposite. I was fortunate enough to get it, but I was on 4 hours sleep, and I went to bed really late, and I woke up super early because I just kept thinking like, oh, there was so much more I could have not done. But as I got close to the interview, I thought, oh, there's a gap in my knowledge here. I need to know this for the interview. I need to read the news. I need to do this. And I made a big list of things, and it probably did impacted my performance worse than it would have made it any better if I just had 8 hours sleep and woke up. But it all went well in the end. But yeah, just have a nice have a good night's sleep beforehand. If you can, speak to the firm and get a hotel because they'll pay for it. They'll pay for you to have a hotel usually in London. If you don't live in London, that means you're not traveling down at what, like for me, it's like a 4 hour, 4.5 hour journey. So I won't be traveling down at what, like 4 in the morning to get there for 8 or whatever time the assessment center starts. So just think about all that. Do you have any more advice, Julia?
Yeah, I think the sleep thing,
Mm.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was really tired during mine, and I stressed myself out beyond compare. Yeah, I think there is such a thing as over preparation, and be
Yeah.
comfortable with the fact that everything you want to talk about might actually just not come up. And you may spend
Yeah.
the entire thing talking about things that you have not interest in, but like you haven't particularly thought about beforehand. That's what mine really felt like. But it was still enjoyable. And I guess final tidbit, have an opinion on AI in law
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
have one that you can justify. It will come up most likely in some way, shape, or form during the whole process, whether that's in the written parts or whether that's in the actual interview itself. It's extremely topical for clients and therefore it's extremely topical for lawyers and therefore you yourselves as aspiring trainees. My interview was essentially 50% AI discussion based. It was
It
quite
also
fun,
came up in
actually.
mine. Yeah, I think they asked me a question about tell me like about the biggest opportunity or challenge in the legal profession, and I said something to do with like practice area or like regional expansion.
Mm.
And then it was like, and then it was kind of nudging me, and I was like, where do you want me to go with this answer? And it was to AI, and we ended up speaking about it for quite a while.
Yeah, it was fun. That was my favorite part of my interview, I think. It was very like discussion based. It felt quite intellectual. So I
Yeah,
very much enjoyed it. But yeah, I think
interesting to pick their brains.
yeah, and then they apologized for grilling me. I think they got a bit too into it and they said, "Oh, wait, oh my God, we're almost at the end. So let's yeah, ask us some questions." Oh yes, have some questions ready, whether they're slightly generic or whether they're very targeted to the people that you are interviewing you. Sometimes you know who's interviewing you, sometimes you don't. My recommendation is to not over research the person or the people because if you get a partner in restructuring and you don't know what that is the night before, maybe know what it is, but don't think that you're going to get necessarily grilled on exactly what they do.
Yeah.
Um, some firms don't tell you who the interviewer is for that reason because they think, it's a bit too much. So just have some nice generic questions in your back pocket, either from the contents of the interview itself, like you might have some follow-up questions, or just, general questions about the firm, because there will always be a point at the end and you don't want to go, no, I don't have any questions. But yeah, those are my final
With
tips.
that,
Don't overthink it.
yeah, I think that I don't have any more tips. I think that brings us about to the end of this week's podcast episode. I mean, as always, I hope you found it useful. And obviously, we've had the conversation last week between me and Tom about approaching that first stage of the application process, getting that application form out of the way, and how to answer the application questions well. And obviously, this one's to do with the latest stage in the application process. If you're still in the trenches right now and you are applying for training contracts, then good luck. I wish the best to you. I hope you succeed. But otherwise, if you haven't succeeded this year, it's not the be all and end all. You've got the summer to start preparing for the next cycle, and September will roll around before you know it. I remember it was Christmas, what, 4 months ago, and it doesn't feel like that all. It's sped right by. So it'll be September soon enough. And the more preparation you get in over the summer and start to think about where you want to apply next cycle, the better it will be for you and less stressful at the time, really. Julia, anything else?
No, just keep pushing. Law firms are looking for resilience, so you've got to show it yourself.
True that.
But
See you
yes,
next week, everyone.
bye. Thank you for listening.